At the risk of maybe speaking to a crowd where there's not a lot of Twitter users, I did want to bring up the point that if you want to live tweet this event, the hashtag for the MIT Enterprise Forum Texas is at MITEF_Texas. So for all those folks maybe under 35, tweet away. Okay, so with that, we're on our third of the four perspectives. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who was born and raised basically in the Galveston Bay area, Kemah, Texas, has undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Houston, was an attorney with Bracewell Giuliani, a widely read Houston Chronicle columnist on a lot of different issues, including the pension issue. I love this book, and I actually didn't know about it, but now I'm going to go out and buy it. The book is called Unapologetically Moderate, which is such a great title for, especially given the political landscape we're in right now. A former mayor of Kemah, ran for mayor of Houston, and just barely lost the runoff, and also a board member of the Galveston Bay Foundation, a conservation group here in Houston. Please welcome Bill King.
I'm going to keep my remarks pretty short tonight because I know all of you are dying to go see the debate tonight, right? Masochist. Believe it or not, we have 3 more weeks of this left. It's like this, it will never end. If you've had these exams where you say, how is this one unlike the other ones in the group? Well, I'm that person here tonight. I'm the non-technical person, to give you a little bit of a practical implication of this. And there's 2 or 3 points I want to make. One is we tend to think about these water problems being off in the future. But when you start having stresses on the system, it shows up some places before it does others. And we actually had this problem in Kemah. The only water supply for Kemah, we're on the north end of the Gulf Coast Water Authority's main line that ran up 146 that comes out of the big Texas City Reservoir, which has an allocation for all the industrial uses before the municipal uses. And so you're severely restricted on the amount of water that you can get out of that area. And so over the last, and there was water out to the west and to the north of us, but they require major supply lines to be added in, which were just, financially, we couldn't figure out how to do. And so in the last decade, in the Kemah Clear Lake Shores area, we actually had to turn down a number of projects, primarily large apartment, because we simply did not have the water capacity to build those projects. So this is something that's actually impacting economic development as we speak today. The other point I want to make, coming from that experience down there, that when people start talking about uses of water, like Amanda outlined, one thing that we forget is that we've got to have some water at the end of the day that goes into the estuary system. And if we don't, it's going to have a tremendously adverse environmental impact on the estuaries. The inflows really do 2 things. One is, Galveston Bay, for all of the discharges that we have in that bay, the water quality is really remarkably good there, considering that you've got all this industry and all these municipal uses around there compared to a lot of other places around the country. And one of the reasons that the water quality is actually pretty good in Galveston Bay and why it's still such a productive estuary in terms of fish and oysters and shrimps is we've got these 2 big rivers that flow huge amounts of water into that bay, and it flushes it out on a regular basis. And that flushing action is what's kept the water quality pretty high in Galveston Bay, notwithstanding the fact we've done all these things to try to deteriorate the water quality. The second thing that affects, and this is a slide I brought from Galveston Bay, is that when you start restricting the freshwater inflows, it really affects the salinity of the bay. And once you start changing the salinity of the bay, then that has a tremendous impact on the species survival, oysters especially. And this is a slide that compares back in the drought compared to a regular flow. And you can see how much saltier the bay got during that drought. Now, this was a natural event, and it doesn't hurt the bay to have a drought periodically. It recovers from it. But if we start taking all the water out of the rivers for all these other uses, and we don't have enough water running into Galveston Bay, this will become a permanent situation, and the bay cannot survive this becoming permanent. And so there's a lot of discussion in the environmental community, and there's some regulations about how much water has to get to the bay. But when we start thinking about what do we take out of the river, you know, to do agriculture, municipal, and fracking and all that, we've got to remember at the end of the day, we've got to put enough back to make sure that we maintain that environment down there. One of the great opportunities, I think, in this area is making sure that our systems are efficient and return as much of that water as possible back to the waterway. I don't know, Mike, some of y'all may know the exact numbers, but I think it's something like 60% of the water that the city of Houston takes out gets back into the system. So you've got this tremendous loss of fresh water. You know, the water's not created or destroyed. I mean, there's, you know, it's all there someplace. But when you've got a very leaky system like the city of Houston has, then you lose a lot of that water into the water table and so forth. So I think that if we can figure out how to make that system more efficient in terms of returning more water to the waterway, even though it's used in the process, that would help this problem a lot. Sort of the last point I want to make, and I end up making this point in a lot of different settings. I know during the mayoral campaign, we had an environmental forum one night, and we were in front of all these parks people and greenies and everything, and then we were talking about, one candidate after was talking about, well, he was going to do, we're going to build bike lanes, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It got to me, and I said, listen, I said, I've got a pretty good environmental record. I've been in Galveston Bay for over a couple of decades. I've given tens of thousands of dollars. I planted marsh grass. I mean, my heart's really with you. But let me just tell you, you can't afford anything that any of these people have talked about because our city of Houston is broke. And it's not just the city of Houston. This is municipal governments around the country. Now, there are varying degrees of how bad the financial condition is. But we have almost every major city has an unsustainable financial model these days. And the top 5 cities in the country right now, including Houston, are technically insolvent. That means that their liabilities now exceed their assets. If these were businesses, we'd be taking them down to bankruptcy court and liquidating them. And there's a lot of different reasons that the model's broken, but it mostly relates to this issue of the pensions and this tremendous increase in the benefits that came from the pensions. And let me just tell you, get your mind around the magnitude of these numbers for a minute. You take everything that the city of Houston has built in the last 175 years, airports, streets, water and sewer plants, everything that we've built in 175 years, we've accumulated about $12 billion of bond debt for all of that. Okay, $12 billion in 175 years, everything you've got. In the last 15 years, we've run up $8 billion of debt on our pension systems. In 15 years, we've accumulated 2/3 of the debt that we accumulated in 175 years building all the incredible infrastructure this city has. Last year, we spent $400 million on the pensions. Next year, it will be $650 million. Now, for you engineers in the room, tell me how many projects could you do for $650 million in the city of Houston that would improve the water system or the wastewater treatment system? A lot, right? This is a broken financial model, and if it's not fixed, it's going to back up on every other thing that we're trying to do in terms of quality of life in this city and a lot of other cities. So that's absolutely got to be addressed. The last thing that I would like to mention is that we also have a governance problem in some areas, and it's particularly acute in Harris County. And it becomes from this incredible fragmentation of government that we have. And it's worse here than almost any other place I've been able to find. I'll give you one quick example. In Dallas County, I think there are 6 wastewater treatment plants in the county. In Harris County, there are 435, I think the last count that I saw. There are over 1,000 governmental entities that exist in Harris County. We have taken our government and sliced it up in so many different ways, and you create this incredible inefficiency. I had a meeting with the EPA a few months ago, or back during the campaign, and I said, if I happen to get elected mayor, can you tell me what would be the most important thing to do to improve water quality in the Houston area? and they said, you need to go out and annex and consolidate a bunch of these small MUDs and private utility companies into the city's water plant. But we've allowed this stuff to grow up in this very fragmented fashion. It is enormously inefficient. It is very, very difficult to regulate and keep these folks in compliance. And it's another thing that's broken in our model. So there's two things that we're gonna have to figure out in this area, and there's a lot of other areas that have the same problem, but we seem to have them more acutely than most places, and that is getting our finances fixed and then get our governance fixed. Because if we don't do those two things, I'm afraid we're gonna be spinning our wheels, and we're gonna have a lot of symposiums like this where we talk about all these great things that need to get done, but we don't have the money and we don't have the governance model to make them happen. Thank you very much.